Mr. Castaldo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam. Dear colleagues, the non-decision of European Council to once again postpone the negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia is a huge mistake, an historic mistake. After the very many recommendations tabled by the Commission and the Parliament, it's embarrassing, it's frustrating for our partners, because they have the right as to ask themselves what our intentions are. Albania and North Macedonia have made a lot of sacrifices to achieve this moment in time. We have an historic agreement was reached with Greece, and that would have not been possible years ago. We promised these countries that they would be looked at individually because of their own merits. Now, the promises that have been made are really creating a serious precedent and are opening the doors to the Balkans, to our strategic opponents. Whereas Erdogan is visiting certain parts of the region, the friends of Albania, North Macedonia, and I do welcome the speaker, and I have met him before. Be courageous, be patient. You will belong to this family, and it can't be stopped by the Council permanently.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Last week's decision in the European Council shook the foundations of one of Europe's most successful policies. What has been a source of long-standing consensus has now become an open geopolitical problem. As a standing rapporteur for Serbia, I can tell you that the failure to open accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania is our bigger political failure to commit credibly to enlargement. And a credible offer for EU membership to Western Balkan countries is in our joint and strategic European interests. Let me respond clearly to voices from France, the Netherlands, Denmark that question or even reject enlargement. If we want a stronger and internationally respected union, we must strive for a decisive voice and influence in our immediate neighbourhood. The disillusionment today in the Western Balkans is enormous. The North Macedonians even changed the name of their country to get the green light from the European Union. Let's remember, enlargement has brought unification and an unprecedented sense of security to Europe. However, our security is not a given, especially when we look at Turkey's and Russia's actions in our neighbourhood. We do need successful, stable, resilient, democratic and most of all European Western Balkans. The success of Southeastern Europe on its path into the European Union will also be our European success. Failure is not an option.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mrs. Santos.
Thank you, President. I must admit to you that I'm extremely disappointed at the moment. And I know that that disappointment is shared by the people of Albania and North Macedonia, as they can see that their aspirations to join the European Union have been officially blocked, following their expectations having been raised by letters from the Commission, Parliament and the Council. Both the countries fulfil the criteria for opening talks, and they've completed the reforms that we asked them to. This process cannot be stopped, and yet the Council has allowed itself to be held hostage by Mr. Macron and has opened up the possibility of other players moving into a region which is of strategic importance for the strengthening of the European project. If the European Union proves unable to have a strategic vision and assume leadership, if it's not going to be seen as a credible partner, we're just heading for a complete loss of reputation. The Council has failed, but we here in Parliament will still fight to keep our promises.
1 minute, Mr. Groschel.
Thank you very much. I regret the Council's decision not to start negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. Especially so I'm disappointed that the Council did not recognize and respect compromises that Northern Macedonia had to make on their path to the European Union. I heard that we need reform of the accession process and an institutional reform before the negotiations can start. However, this is not a barrier if there is enough political will. We are sending a clear message that the EU is currently institutionally unable to support countries that are committed to European values and the European path. This is an entirely wrong message to send in these times of many geopolitical games in our vicinity. This is especially true for the Western Balkans, where North Macedonia is a bright exception in a region of democratic decline, where there is a rise of populism and nationalism. Northern Macedonia represents a small window of opportunity where the EU can send a ray of European hope to this region. We need to send a message that countries who reject populism, nationalism and corruption do have a European perspective. If we do not wish or cannot send this message, we should say so clearly.
Stick to their speaking time. We are already running late. I'll be strict on the speaking time and I'll be cutting off microphones if you do not stick to your speaking time. Thank you for your understanding. 1 minute, Mr. Bagg.
Herr Präsident.
President, the economy of the EU is facing a number of challenges. There are also uncertainties with Brexit as well. So why, right now, why should we consider having North Macedonia and Albania join us, the two weakest economies in Europe? Both of them have very fragile institutions. They have trouble with rule of law and trouble with regulation. In the recent Gallup poll, 60% of the adults in the Albania want to leave their country, and the citizens, that should give us greater concerns with all the problems that would entail. At the same time, North Macedonia, they have had a referendum to change their name, and we have to acknowledge that. But this constant wish to expand the borders of the EU isn't good. We have to see what kind of pragmatic help could we do, and have them to have a more balanced policy in supporting these countries in the long term. Thank you.
Mr. Rządca, 1 minute.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie przewodniczący, panie komisarzu, szanowni państwo.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the authorities of the European Union really suffered after the most recent decisions. It looks like the interests of France are more valuable or more important than the interests of the entire European Union. North Macedonia has met all the criteria, and all the people of Macedonia knew this. So I think that the European Union has already committed itself. And this is certainly not a good thing for the entire European Union, and it is certainly not good for the entire region. North Macedonia has opened a path towards NATO. North Macedonia has done a lot to achieve this success. And perhaps we know that perhaps we may need to change our mind. Mrs. von der Leyen was in favor of this, but Macron's commissioner was not accepted, and perhaps that's the reason why all of this happened.
Minute and a half.
Τα βάσανα από τα οποία έχουν υποφέρει οι λαοί των Βαλκανίων.
President, thank you. The suffering of the people of the Western Balkans for many causes. The competition amongst the empires, border changes, followed by capitalist reforms. Experience has shown that joining the EU or NATO never works to the benefit of ordinary people. On the contrary, the great monopolists prevent that. And we can see this again also in France's opposition and that of other countries. There's a struggle to intervene and gain control over the affairs of North Macedonia and Albania and the whole region. So these clashes within the European Union bear this out. Look at what happened with the Prespa Agreement, for example. Now the whole of Europe can live in peace, but outside the corset of the European Union and NATO, the corset of imperialism and irredentist claims, we don't have to have the economies in the hands of the monopolists.
Dear colleagues, there is no need to repeat that last week Council decision was wrong and bad, very bad. And there is no need to repeat how important for the whole continent it was, it is, and I hope it will be in the future EU enlargement policy. Also, there is no need to repeat how much was done and how much painful reforms were implemented, especially by North Macedonia government and also by Albania, and how much today they feel being betrayed by us. What we need to discuss today is very simple. What we need to change on our side, on the EU side, in order not to make the whole enlargement process to be interrupted by one EU member state. So what we can change? Before we shall move into enlargement reforms, we need to create a simple rule or tradition, to ask those member states, or at least one, who at the Council level are blocking enlargement, to come out here and to explain openly what was their argument to vote against. Then we would have the possibility to discuss those arguments here in the European Parliament. And maybe in such case, we would be able to find a way how to assist those member states to overcome their resistance. So today, I would say we need to be concerned not only about how to assist North Macedonia and Albania, because they deserve it, but also how to assist France to overcome their mistake, because this is a mistake not only of France, but of all of us. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Schieder, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Chair. As Johannes Hahn has correctly said, this decision of the European Council is a serious mistake. And with the responsibility for the error, of course, is made by the President of France. And the results of this mistake is something that we all in Europe have to digest together. And it's important to emphasize that it's important to meet the promises that the EU has made. And very important reforms have been carried out in North Macedonia and Albania. They've even addressed the questions of the names and the neighborhood. So I think we hope that the Council will come over this mistake, but still we have to have very close bilateral contact with these two countries, Albania and North Macedonia, so they understand that this was an error and we're going to help them. Thank you.
Mr. Pyatt, 1 minute.
Thank you. The European Council has to make a new and strategic decision, because this was a mistake not to open the accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. The perspective of joining the EU has been a driving force behind changes we have seen in those countries. North Macedonia was led to believe that solving the name issue would give it the possibility to move forward with moving closer to the EU. Although ultimately countries should move forward with domestic reforms because of their own necessity, one cannot ignore the fact that future prospects of joining the EU have been a driving force for these reforms as well. I believe the EU should at least open the accession negotiations with both countries to encourage them to continue with domestic reforms, to align themselves more with the EU and its policies, and to have reliable partners in different global issues. Failure to open the accession negotiations may unfortunately also contribute to the possibility of an external influence in the Western Balkan region. It is hard to see the EU succeed in a more global arena if it cannot be successful in its immediate neighbourhood. Thank you.
Mrs. Huhtasaari, 1 minute.
Arvoisa puhemies, EU candidacy state.
Chairman.
Countries which have a realistic prospect of joining the Union. Albania and North Macedonia are both crime-ridden countries with problems of corruption and rule of law. The EU has had enough trouble of absorbing Romania and Bulgaria into the Union, who were not even ready to join the Union back in 2007. We should not give false hopes to countries who do not really fulfil the criteria of an EU membership candidate. The EU should stop spreading its borders ever wider when its own house is not in order.
Mr. Lagos, 1 minute and a half.
Άκουσα πριν από λίγο από κάποιους ομιλητές ότι υπήρξε μεγάλο πολιτικό θάρρος για να φτάσουμε στη συμφωνία των Σκοπίων.
Thank you very much. I think that the agreement between North Macedonia and my country was something that was a step where you didn't really need a political courage. There was just a minority which forced their will on the Greek people. More than 80% of the people did not want this agreement. The Greek people called for a referendum, but this was then rejected by the Greek government. That is the former government, and this government is also the ones that have authorized this agreement, so the people of the West Balkans don't need to believe that there is no Macedonian country outside Greece, and you need to understand this. And we've seen this already, and one thing needs to be made very clear here on this piece of paper on a marble plate. It is clearly said that Macedonia belongs to Greece. I'm a Greek, and I can actually read this, and this is a marble inscription that has existed for over 2,000 years. Some of you might not be in a position to read this, but Macedonia is Greek.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner Hahn, dear colleagues, the European perspective for the Western Balkan countries has to remain open, and that can only have a stabilizing effect on the region, and it will also contribute to the modernization of these countries and strengthen their democracy. The governments in Tirana and Skopje should not have to submit to different criteria before the accession negotiations are started. Albania has to recognize the rights of the Greek minority, but there have already been infringements for many years. And concerning North Macedonia, we support a European perspective. The Prespa agreement has changed the name of this country, and that should be linked up to the opening of accession chapters. The combined formulation is a formulation which is in all the passports of this country, and it of course plays a role in their membership of NATO.
The indecision of the European Council from last week sends a completely wrong message to the people of the Western Balkans, not only to the citizens of North Macedonia and Albania. And the most wrong message is that the European Union cannot be trusted. Whatever sacrifice and effort you make, you can be betrayed, not even for serious interests, but for the public opinion polls at this moment in one country. Yes, the sun will keep rising in North Macedonia and Albania, but the EU's influence as a global and regional actor will continue to set as a consequence. While we are waiting for the grand European reforms promised by Mr. Macron, others will gladly fill the vacuum created by the decision of the Council. We will not renew Europe by disrespecting our own commitments and holding key EU policies as a hostage to nationalistic and egoistic political interests. Finally, We have to start repairing the damage made last week as of tomorrow. Thank you.
Mr. Šimečka, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I have to say I agree with the Commissioner and many of my colleagues in saying that last week's indecision of the Council was a grave strategic mistake, and that the problem now is that the EU's credibility internationally is being damaged, because we profess to be the champions of the rules-based international order, and yet we have just thrown doubt on our own rules which we have created for the Western Balkan enlargement process. Because the enlargement is based on conditionality, on clear objective criteria and assessment, and we can certainly debate how to improve it, but we cannot just move the goalposts on a political whim. And the consequences are already being felt today with the political crises in North Macedonia and the blame game in Albania. Now, I have to say I sympathise with some of the concerns over the rule of law, given the track record of Hungary and others, but it should not be an excuse to stop enlargement. Rather, should be an impetus to strengthen the rule of law in the Union and for the enlargement countries. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bardella, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Today we are debating the prospect of Albania joining the European Union at some point in the future. Why would you want to bring in a country which in practice is already within the European Union, since the Albanians are already in France, making most of the single market? Their mafia organisations are already moving freely and laundering all their extortion money in our country. Bringing them in would only compound the anarchic situation that the French authorities already snowed under with at the moment. And then, if you want them to be able to protect their way of life, well, in Europe, why bring in a country that's under the direct influence of Erdogan's Turkey? Listen to the message that the peoples of Europe sent you at the last European elections. The process of building Europe is dying because you won't put any limits to the banks, but above all, these endless enlargements that bring the whole system running to a halt, while other regional blocs in the world are pressing ahead with trade agreements.
There's a blue card request from Flego Walter. Do you accept the question? Okay, please ask the question.
Hvala vam na riječi. Pa neću kolegu pitati.
Thank you. I won't ask my colleague when was the last time he visited Tirana, Bitoli or Skopje. I'll ask him something else. Today we're discussing an absurd situation. Some countries which are not in the EU want to enter the EU, and some who are inside want to get out. We have to put an end to all this. When you make a promise to someone, then that someone expects the promise to be fulfilled, because the next time they won't trust you anymore. I'm sure that this is a historic mistake. I'm sure that we are playing with peace, and my question to you is, what other way of life do these people have, unlike us who are members of the EU?
You have 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you, President. Colleague, I was elected in France to defend the French people's interests, and so it's my concern to uphold the well-being of my people first and foremost, just as you appear to prefer other people's interests rather than ours. It so happens that the peoples of Europe today expressed their views in large numbers at the last European elections, and the peoples of Europe are now aspiring to having their identity and sovereignty protected, as well as their democracy, whereas this endless process of enlargement is imposing competition on all the countries in Europe, and it's devil take the hindmost.
1 minute and a half, Mr. Radachowski.
At the time when I applied for a 1-minute speech, I did not expect that North Macedonia and Albania would receive such a slap in the face from the EU, and that the accession negotiations with these countries would not be opened. The situation has been caused by disapproval on the part of the so-called big players in the EU, those who want to make decisions on everything and everybody. At first we forced Albania to join NATO so that the American boys could play their war games. Then we forced the Macedonians to change the name of their country, and now we have simply thrown them overboard. I suppose that we are now going to force the Macedonians to make roofs on all their houses flat, so that the American helicopters could be landing there. Then, I presume, we shall start the negotiations. Dear Western European friends, it is no problem for you to admit into Europe several million people from countries ranging from Afghanistan to Libya, but you do have a huge problem to accept into Europe a small, less than 2 million strong Slavonic and Christian nation of Macedonia. You simply treat Slavonic and Christian nations as if they were second-class citizens, perhaps also thanks to Slavonic traitors and quislings in our own ranks. I refer to those who have grown idiotic and have sunk so low that what they wear on the lapels of the jacket is the EU flag rather than the flag of their own country.
Mr. Ressler, 1 minute.
Poštovani potpredsjedniče.
The policy of enlargement is one of the most successful EU policies. It has unified Europe, brought stability and development to a large part of Europe. For this reason, it is totally unacceptable to block the beginning of accession negotiations, especially because there was a positive recommendation by the Commission based on objective indicators and reforms. States which want to become member states have to be evaluated exclusively on the basis of their results and not depending on the political climate in particular member states, even if these are some of the largest member states of the EU. This huge strategic historic mistake will strengthen the other global actors in the region, and this irresponsibility will also bring into question the credibility of the EU. That's why the Zagreb summit in May of next year will be a chance to focus on this area and to set a clear timeline. Thank you.
Fajon, 1 minute.
Hvala, predsedujoči.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, young people on the Western Balkans are losing their hope. They no longer trust us, they don't believe us, and they are right to do so. Let me recall the words of the French president last autumn. He said to the North Macedonia prior to the referendum about the Prespa agreement, "We are counting on you." End of quote. This same president, Mr. Macron, is the person I'm asking whether he will take responsibility for the stability in the region. Will he take on the responsibility for the snap elections in North Macedonia? Empty promises is all that we are seeing in European Union when we speak about enlargement, and empty promises are the knife in the back of the citizens of North Macedonia, Albania and the Western Balkans. It's been 10 years since North Macedonia, or actually since the European Commission promised North Macedonia for the first time that it can become a member of the European Union. And I'm ashamed today that I have to apologize for these deeds to all citizens in the Western Balkans. We really need to shoulder the responsibility and to discuss how we will decide on enlargement in the future, and we should repair our mistakes as of tomorrow.
Ressler wants to ask you a question. Do you accept?
Yeah.
30 seconds.
I agree with most of what Madam Fajon said, but what I want to ask is why hasn't she shown the same credibility and supported the accession of Croatia to Schengen after the Commission gave a green light and it was based on very objective indicators?
Thank you for your question. Even though we are not discussing the enlargement, the North Macedonia and Albania, because tomorrow will be the crucial vote. But as to Schengen, I support the inclusion of Croatia, Bulgaria and Romania once Schengen is ready for it, and also when Croatia meets all the technical and legal conditions, particularly when it comes to the issue of the returning of refugees and how refugees are being handled on the border between Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Mr. Borchia.
Thanks, Mr. President. So, the Council has tried to move forward the process to enlarge the EU after a long period of inaction, but President Macron vetoed the idea. Possibly this is all linked in some obscure way to the turning down of Ms. Goulard as a commissioner. So we are seeing an EU that's wasting taxpayers' money while ignoring reminders and warnings from the Court of Auditors and expecting countries like Albania to solve all their problems by themselves. Albania is part of the Organisation of Islamic Conference, and while we waste money, the Islamic Conference organises and provides money for schools. Salonika is not Skopje. Let me say, Mr. President, that we've got all this Russian, Chinese influence in the Balkans, but when they bought half of Greece or the airports, nobody said anything.
Mr. Alexandrov Yordanov.
Господин председател.
Thank you, Mr. President. France is not a state that would make mistakes just like that because of negligence. France is a state that supposedly knows what it does. But apparently, this decision of France serves Russia's interests in the Balkans. And Russia, as we know, is against European and Euro-Atlantic integration of the countries of the Western Balkans. We know that Russia has been waging a hybrid war. It is a big mistake of Macron, as a result of which there will be early elections in North Macedonia. However, we should not wait for the outcome of these elections, nor should we wait for the summit in Zagreb, because then President Macron will say, let's wait and see what will happen with the new Macedonian government, which will lead us into a dangerous political spiral. I would recommend Paris not to play games with Belgrade and Moscow behind the scenes.
Mr. Benifei.
Thank you very much, President. I'm absolutely convinced that the stop of the negotiations of the Council in dealing with Albania and Northern Macedonia is a huge error. We see these countries trying seriously in order to enter the European Union. We saw the 2018 PRESPA agreement. We've seen the numerous different reforms that have been instituted in Albania. All of this at the request and behest of the European Union. So I think indeed it's important for us to move into a new phase. And we also don't want to dash the hopes of all of these young people, the citizens of these countries that want the best for their countries. And many of these people receive remittances from their family members. Many of them are in Italy, actually. So there's a need to change the way that the institutions are looking at this. And the way that the institutions are working in these countries as well. But simply banking on that or stating simply that the institutional framework there is not appropriate isn't the way to go. We have to help them to improve.
Thank you. Commissioner. Minister. What happened in the European Council last week means that the EU has lost its credibility in the enlargement process. So the EU has lost the right to dictate
reforms in the Western Balkans because the EU didn't honour its own promises. We know that reforms must be implemented, but relations between states aren't a one-way street. It would be good if the heads of state and government of the EU would realise that the EU isn't the lead party in these negotiations, rather that the EU is interested in the accession takes place. Reforms should be made within the EU, but it wouldn't be right to ask the countries of the Western Balkans to wait until they've finally agreed. The European Commission must find a solution to this issue which is acceptable to all. Thank you.
Mr. Mixer, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. The Council decision not to open talks with North Macedonia and Albania was highly regrettable. More than that, it was plain wrong. Much has been said about what this failure could mean to EU's credibility, not just in those two aspirant countries, but far beyond, and how it could destabilise the whole region. What makes it particularly shameful is the fact that the refusal to open talks was motivated by domestic political consideration, or to put it more directly, by poll figures in a certain EU member state. It was not the result of any failure by the aspirants to live up to their end of the bargain. In fact, quite the opposite was the case. The leaders of North Macedonia especially had displayed admirable courage and taken significant political risks to resolve a long-standing disagreement with a neighbour. I believe the Council decision from last week runs counter to the vision of Europe whole and free. It is crucial that the mistake be corrected before irreparable damage is done to our credibility and to our common European security interest.
Mrs. Kokalari, 1 minute.
Tack så mycket, herr talman. President Macron.
Thanks very much, Mr. President. President Macron came here to this hemicycle just over 2 years ago and said what he thought about European democracy. He said it was our greatest opportunity. He said that we needed to continue along the road of democracy. So I agreed with all that and find it particularly terrible that he's used his veto to stop accession negotiations beginning with North Macedonia and Albania. The whole process of enlargement, which has been a very useful tool for encouraging countries to carry out democratic reforms and respect human rights, has been stymied. We've got countries that are trying to build up their democracies. We should be encouraging them to do more. Because if the European Union isn't present in the region, then Turkey, Russia, Saudi Arabia will move in. We need a Europe that's united to the east as well as the west. And the Commission needs to do something now. Thank you.
Concludes our list of speakers, and we proceed with Catch the Eye. I have received 13 requests for Catch the Eye, but given that we are running late, I will not be able to serve all these requests. I will give the floor to one member per group, and I will give priority to those who have not spoken yet and who have been here for the whole time of the debate. Mr. Pospíšil.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. Chair. I'm very glad that most colleagues here have expressed a clear view that the decision of the Council is wrong. We have many times said that we need to integrate countries of Western Balkans. Any other decision is mistaken because it will only lead to increasing influence of Russia in that area, as some colleagues have said, and the EU will weaken in that area. What should we tell the citizens of these people, since we basically threw them overboard? Mr. Commissioner, we've many times debated that in the interest of the EU, we should continue in negotiations, access negotiations, and those colleagues who are skeptical that these countries aren't ready, I am telling them, this is just the beginning, just an opening, just a launch of negotiations. It is not accession itself. It can last for years, but at least it gives chance to these countries that they may one day enter the EU. So let's reassess this. Let's pressure Macron, because this is against the EU.
Mrs. Ward.
Thank you, President.
As a friend of the Western Balkans, I have no doubt that Albania and North Macedonia will eventually join the EU. You have indeed taken important and successful steps so far to become a member, and the recent act of sabotage in the Council by France, Denmark and the Netherlands is regrettable. In many ways, Albania and North Macedonia are ahead of some EU member states. For example, both countries have ratified the Istanbul Convention, whilst my own country, the UK, is dragging its heels and Bulgaria prevaricates. I call on all leaders of the European Council to put this back on their agenda and grant agreement for the opening of the accession talks. The image of the EU will be affected in the whole of the Western Balkans region and across the EU if we don't demonstrate political integrity and openness. I am convinced that the future of the Western Balkans lies in Europe, and the future of Europe lies in unity with the Western Balkans.
Mr. Austrevicius.
Chair, Commissioner, colleagues, are we giving up the promise of Europe whole, free and at peace? Enlargement proved to be the best available instrument to assist and to encourage neighbouring countries to pursue democratic reforms, to develop market economies and to improve well-being of citizens, and most importantly, to achieve regional cooperation and stability. Via action plans and partnership agreements, we are raising tough criteria for our neighbours, but somehow we forget to uphold our end of the deal. This is unjustifiable. The candidate countries might not be ready for membership today, but we must look into a long-term perspective. We need to counterbalance efforts of such countries like Russia, which, with their luxurious proposals, offer only short-term gains, while the EU enlargement perspective is about the highest available quality of life, fundamental freedoms and peace. To achieve this, bureaucratic arguments must be replaced by a visionary policy of the EU enlargement. Thank you, Chair.
Mrs. von Kramon-Taubadel.
Vielen Dank. Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, in der Tat ein historischer.
What we saw at the last summit is a historic mistake. For Albania and North Macedonia to keep the door closed to EU membership is not just an affront for the governments of these countries, but in particular for the young generation. It's a fatal signal in this entire region. In the past, generations in the Balkans had no perspectives or progress. That meant that a lot of people, even the most cleverest, left the countries. The perspective of accession meant for many people that young people would have a future in their own countries. But with this decision, despite the not opening the criteria, the possibilities for reforms have been paused. Others will not wait to close the gaps left by the EU in the Balkans. Russia, Turkey, China, or even Qatar are making every effort to advance the cooperation in the region, and it can't be in our interest. Thank you.
Mr. Le Breton.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm delighted that Council has stopped negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. Albania is a company which is prey to rampant corruption, which has gone through all levels of society. 1 young person in 3 is unemployed, according to World Bank figures. Just a reform of the justice system has been going on for several years, that's true, but the results are very worrying. An international committee has got rid of corrupt judges, but of the 17 judges in the Supreme Court, there's only 2 left. And of the 9 in the Constitutional Court, there's only 1. These figures show the breadth of corruption in Albania. You need to accept the evidence. Albania doesn't deserve to be in the EU. As the Belgian newspaper said on the 23rd of June this year, it's a narco state under the influence of drug traffickers. Thanks very much.
Mr. Papadimoulis.
Thank you very much, President. In a couple of hours, the plenary of the European Parliament will vote with a huge majority involving all political groups, requesting from the Council to change this terrible historic mistake. We, of course, greet the Prespa agreement, and we send a message to from the Parliament to the people of Albania and North Macedonia that the European Union is something that is credible. It is a structure which is credible, and we send a message to Emmanuel Macron that his no, which ought to be corrected very quickly indeed, doesn't play the game of stability, nor does he serve the interests of the EU. He serves the interests of Putin, Erdogan, instability, and other similar such things in Europe, in the Balkans as well. So we here in this room, we greet this majority vote against what the Council has called for.
For a question by raising a blue card, but given that we are running really late and we are in the catch the eye, I am going to reject that. I'm sorry for that. I will now give the floor to Commissioner Hahn to speak for the Commission. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President. I'd like to thank everybody in the hemicycle for the overwhelming support of the credible accession process, and in particular that the two countries, North Macedonia and Albania, should be given the green light to start with the accession negotiations. We're not talking about them joining tomorrow or the day after. We're talking about a multi-annual process. It takes years to build up credibility, and it can just take a few minutes or hours to destroy that credibility. And up to a point, that has happened in the West Balkans, but not just in the West Balkans. With this decision, in the European Union, we have lost a considerable amount of credibility and predictability that we stand for in the world. That's been lost. In our immediate neighborhood, there's a whole host of problems which are popping up. Look at Lebanon. I don't need to mention the Middle East. Tunisia, the political situation, which is very fragile. Algeria, an unclear political situation. I can only hope that those who are responsible for this present situation weren't aware in this decision what it means for the standing of the European Union throughout the world, in particular in its neighborhood, and what it means in terms of influence and the ability to implement things. It won't be easy to win that back. I tend, because I'm a member of the party of the glass half full, that things will turn out for the best. And I'm also prepared to take the various arguments which have been aired in the last months, why that the negotiations can't be opened yet. I will take them seriously. Often I had the feeling that arguments are being rehearsed which are more of an excuse just not to say that I'm against enlargement. But one of these arguments that we've heard from France, but also from a few other countries, was that before the next enlargement we need to have a deepening, an improvement of our form of cooperation and the way we make decisions. Personally, I say yes, I have a lot of understanding for that, but I do not have understanding for this process taking place sequentially. It's fully possible and makes sense and realistic and pragmatic to have this process in parallel, because both these will take years. But if we first talk about the deepening, and then we talk about further accessions, then these countries will have an accession perspective of about 30 years. And I think we can all agree that that wouldn't be a perspective at all. And I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that my services, and me personally, and I take it that my successor will make every effort to look at the methods of the accession process. Nobody's perfect. There are always possibilities to improve, but much of what I've heard so far already exists. The main framework of the rule of law, and no negotiation will necessarily lead to an accession, and this process is also reversible. We'll do that, and I hope we'll work on this with commitment. Finally, I'd like to tell you a little anecdote. In 2013, as a regional commissioner in Brussels, I organized a little seminar with civil representatives from Northern Ireland, who told me their various examples and projects as how they brought about reconciliation in Northern Ireland. And I can tell you, 90% of the participants in 2013 were representatives of the countries of the former Yugoslavia. And you'll know exactly why they were there. Because they were fully aware that peace, stability and prosperity can only be achieved in the West Balkans within a bigger whole, and that is to say within the EU. So once again, I'd like to thank you for this strong signal of hope which you'll send out tomorrow when you make your decision. And I'd like to thank the President of the North Macedonian Parliament. Wish him all the best and thank him for the many initiatives which he has made in the last months to open up the country to Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll now give the floor to Mrs. Tuppurainen, who will speak for the Council. The floor is yours.
Mr. President, Mr. Speaker of the Parliament of North Macedonia, honourable members of the Parliament, I would like to thank you for this discussion, and I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Commissioner Hahn for his enduring commitment to the enlargement process. This discussion has further convinced me that our support for the Western Balkans, our support to their European perspective, is solid and it's enduring. In the light of the European Council statement, they will revert to the issue of the enlargement before the Western Balkans Summit in Zagreb in May 2020. It means that the work in the Council continues. So we shall not give up the work. Let me also recall that an agreement to open accession negotiations is only the first step in a very long process. And no matter how disappointed and frustrated I also personally am, I would like to state that now it's not the time to dwell on what happened last week. And no matter how tempting it is useless to point fingers and name and shame anyone, because now we must move forward. We must take further steps. We must now carefully consider the next steps in order to succeed in a process which, in any case, is going to be long and require a lot of hard work from anyone. We, as Presidency, are now carefully taking stock of the situation and then move forward. So I would like to remain optimistic and hopeful, yet of course realistic as to the prospect in the next couple of months. And I have full respect for the work accomplished by the two candidate countries, North Macedonia and Albania, so far, and I would like to encourage them to continue in the same spirit and to deliver on reforms for the sake of their citizens. What is good for them, it will be good, and it is good for Europe. Thank you very much for this discussion and for your attention.
Thank you. I have received 7 motions for resolutions to wind up this debate. They come from the following political groups: ID, ECR, Greens/EFA, GUE/NGL, SND, Renew, and EPP. I would like to thank for the attendance. I would like to thank to Commissioner Hahn, to Mrs. Tuppurainen. I would also like to thank to the Speaker of the Parliament of the Republic of North Macedonia, who joined us in the discussion as well. The debate is closed. The vote takes place tomorrow.